Welcome. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Leadership Series webinar on IoT and risk mitigation. I'm Brendan O'Keefe and your host for today. Before I introduce our discussion, I'd like to introduce myself and some housekeeping for the webinar. I'm Brendan O'Keefe, committee member for the ASCI New South Wales chapter, and joining me from the ASCI community all the way from South Korea is Heidi Chow. Welcome, Heidi. It is great to have you with us, albeit so far away, and we hope you're keeping safe. Today we have three keynotes to really drive the topic of IoT and risk management with respect to your supply chains. Firstly, a technical check to ensure that everybody can hear me. Raise your hand if you can hear me, pressing the button on the bottom. If you're having any technical difficulty, please open the chat box appearing below and send a message. Some basic housekeeping guidance for today. The Q&A section is not anonymous. Instead, it allows you to post your questions to the panel and for other attendees to see. There will be time at the end to share responses to the panel. We will be awarding one ASCI CPD point and one RMI CPD point to attendees for today's webinar. Just type CPD in the Q&A box so that we know to require a point going towards your registration or certification maintenance. The webinar is recorded and will be uploaded to the ASCI Resources Library for members tomorrow, and a closed LinkedIn group post will be created for further discussions with our presenters after today's webinar. I would now like to introduce our stellar panel for today. We have Simon Levy, welcome Simon, CEO of the MRIA. We have David Bissett, who is an Australian, who works with an Australian-based partner for Argon & Co, a global specialist supply chain advisory firm. Welcome, David. And finally, we have Loic Barancourt, who is the founder of Thinxtra, the IoT Telco, who specialize in connecting assets and making them work smarter for next generation of Internet of Things solutions across Australia, New Zealand, and Hong Kong. Welcome you all today. To get things started, I'll open up with yourself, Simon. So in the context of today's discussion, how IoT mitigates risk through data-driven transparency, how has the landscape of risk management changed, Simon, from your perspective?
Simon.
No, that's all okay. Great. And that's a great question, and welcome everybody. Risk management and resilience. Well, geez, today it really is front of mind, particularly at the moment with the vast majority of Australia in lockdown. But moving away from that, risk management, it's always traditionally had a strategic focus, and how risk management can impact on those organizational objectives. But there's also an operational level and an operational component to risk management. In the context of supply chain, which we're talking about today, and supply chain managers, where users need to understand the detail and the minutiae of service risk, business continuity, customer satisfaction, they all impact on the bottom line. But risk management today, it's about resilience. It's about faster decision-making. And to do that, it demands accurate information in a timely manner that's easily accessible and understood by all users.
Excellent. Great response, Simon. In terms of, I'll take a question to yourself, David. Simple question first for those among us that may not be up to date with what is Internet of Things and what specific risks can be better mitigated with IoT solutions, and how does that work potentially?
Thanks, Brendan, and hello, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to talk on this topic today. I think following on from Simon's comments, IoT solutions and the capability of their use within the supply chain context is almost a marriage made in heaven when it comes to risk management. So in terms of trying to understand the relationship and the connection with risk management and IoT solutions, I'll start there, then come back to what IoT actually is from a sort of a simplistic point of view and leave the technical explanation to Loic. But generally for me, the lack of visibility in not only your direct supply chain, but the extended value chain from origin of product through to whatever the customer is downstream. That lack of visibility, both in the scope of that supply chain and also the timeliness of the information that is available to decision makers and managers within the supply chain space, is really the primary risk that IoT solutions serve a purpose and seek to address. And that risk, which I think is well known to all supply chain professionals, really manifests itself in an inability to control your supply chain. So you do feel a little bit emasculated without understanding and having visibility of what's going on end to end. Naturally, I think that lack of visibility, lack of information drives slower response times and to some degree can diminish the decision-making opportunity of a supply chain manager or professional because the information may be inaccurate, it may be late, so you can really struggle to actually affect any genuine control and management of your supply chain in those circumstances. And I think the other dimension is around what it means for your customers. So if you lack visibility of your supply chain, you lack the ability to communicate and to be proactive and responsive with your customer base, which from a customer perspective is everything that they want from a supply chain and an operational interface. And this natural relationship all the way along the supply chain, where there's risk upstream, it naturally rolls all the way downstream, growing in size and impact. Really, the IoT sort of value proposition and where IoT solutions can help mitigate those risks. It's all about providing useful management information in real time or close to real time. They can directly mitigate risks, as to Simon's point around customer service, business and operational continuity, cost management, probably an obvious one. And then also, I think a topic that Loic's going to talk about later is around asset management, asset availability, a really important component of the supply chain. And I think, without harping too much on the pandemic and where we all are today, it just reinforces, I think, this point where IoT solutions can play a role in helping us manage quite a challenging supply chain circumstance. If I go backwards and talk about, well, what is IoT? The way we explain it, it's fairly simple terms. So IoT is really a network of physical devices that can be embedded in assets or embedded with merchandise that can send information about where the product is, what conditions the products are in, and it can communicate that information at a very low cost using low-powered wide area network capability, which is something I'm sure Loic will touch on. So if you think of IoT, simply think of three elements. One, sensors, or the devices that are actually capable of generating information. You need a physical or virtual network to essentially capture that information and transmit that information. And then you need a home for that information. So a platform that can accept the data and then essentially communicate and translate that data into useful management information. So in really simple terms, that's the makeup of this broad IoT construct. In terms of use cases, so how does IoT play a role now in supply chain? And these are all use cases that we see in market today. It's not an exhaustive list. There's plenty of other examples out there in market, in other market segments. But from a sort of a product-based supply chain sense, these five are really the top ones that we see in market. So container tracking, which is, I guess, an obvious one. The devices move with the container and you can receive information around location and conditions through container movements. That can easily apply to any asset in the supply chain. And again, I think we'll talk about a few examples in that space. The second one, which is related, is this real-time value stream mapping, which is beyond your own direct supply chain. So your warehouses, your downstream customers. The value stream mapping gives you the ability to map all the movements of products from where you're sourcing them all the way through to their end location with customer. Asset control, a really important one. So obviously, asset pools are really important in certain parts of our market supply chains, particularly in food and automotive. And those assets, if they're visible everywhere, it gives the manager complete control. That helps in terms of utilisation of those assets, in control of the pool, in loss. So you can understand how IoT providing information on location and condition, really important in that space. Likewise, from an equipment perspective, preventative maintenance. So I think most people in the supply chain would be used to scheduled maintenance activities where for specific assets and equipment, just to manage the portfolio of those assets, generally you're looking at them on a scheduled basis. And sometimes you're looking at assets that don't have any issues. So there's a level of efficiency and cost control. If you have an IoT element connected to your pieces of equipment that's giving you sort of information around the health of that equipment, obviously you will prioritise your investment in maintenance around those assets or equipment that are having problems. And you can be more dynamic, more proactive, which has obvious benefits. And then the fifth one is around auto replenishment. So there's certain retail environments for those that work in retail supply chain that don't have core point of sale systems that are presenting inventory information that allows you to replenish. If you don't have a system like that in place, and often with retail environments like vendor machines, you can use IoT to actually give you a view on what products are moving out of the vending machine without installing software to tell you what's going on. So a really low cost effective way of using IoT in a vendor environment. So hopefully that's sort of a small insight into application, what IoT is and how it can serve a purpose in the general risk management of supply chain operations. Excellent.
Thank you, David. That's certainly been a very good overview. To take a question to yourself, Loic, what appears to me at this point is many organizations drown already in what might be regarded as too much data. What additional data insights can IoT solutions for asset tracking and so on deliver that are not already available through various ERP systems or other traditional asset managed software programs?
Thanks, Brendan, and likewise, very happy to be here. So we had a good explanation by David around what is IoT, so the Internet of Things. I'll just put it in a different way, which is IoT is a way for you to ask your assets where they are and where they are feeling, how they are feeling. And so if you can ask them and get that information at the right time to enable you to make the right decisions, this is what an ERP system cannot give you. And an ERP system typically will track the activities, what has been billed, so the invoices going in, coming out, and that's working well. You might have some manual or human-based processes to update information, but if you really want to know what's going on in your supply chain, in particular, if you've got DCs, if you've got distributors, resellers, and like our stores across the nation, that extra level of visibility is very valuable. And so basically, IoT is another data feed into your digital control tower. What becomes interesting is when you look at the business case of IoT, it is about basically giving that next level of visibility. How do we do that? So David touched on it, device, network, platform. I thought I'd share a bit more around the specificities because there is an art into connecting assets. to enable IoT solutions at scale and to enable you to basically collect that information from your assets and make decisions better, the key is to make it in an operationally scalable way and economically feasible. So that's really important to have fit for purpose solutions that do deliver you these insights, but within these two parameters. So how do you do that? Typically, the magic recipe, if you may, is to make sure that you choose the right asset trackers that will send just enough information, not too much, because otherwise it will consume too much battery, it will cost too much on the traditional IoT network. So you might want to think really carefully at what information do you need to know. Maybe, for instance, you need to know when the IBC arrives at a given location, but you don't really care if it is in transit. So maybe 1 or 2 pings a day suffice. And if you start to think that way, it means standard, the next generation of IoT trackers will last 5-10 years. And then they will just give you twice a day information about your assets that you didn't have before. And you've got the right analytic platform that will just help you make better decisions, automate stock levels, have the right alerts if goods come in or out of a given location. So that's really the power of IoT track and trace solutions. So I think that's the key. Maybe in the next slide, just to look at so IoT track and trace solutions that give you that tracking and monitoring capability across your supply chain, and then the analytics that comes with it. So that's basically why it's it's very complementary to traditional ERP systems.
Excellent. Thank you, Loic. I might just revert to you, Simon, for a moment, maybe on the risk management commentary of all of this data flow and the up and down sides, I suppose.
No, of course, as I think I said in the opening, talking to David, talking to Loic, looking at a lot of this is risk management in practice. It's what I've spent my career talking about to organizations. It's having the idea, having the concept, knowing every step of the value chain that not only that you have input into, but your customers do, and where your suppliers go. Having that, and then knowing where it can go wrong, where it can go right, what are the critical elements in there. And then as I'll hopefully touch on as we continue on the conversation, how you can then start to mitigate against those losses and knowledge, and then ultimately using that. And I think that one thing I didn't capture in my introduction, whilst risk management is about having the data and it's about being resilient in that term, it's actually using that to make better decisions. And if you don't have the oversight, if you don't have this level of detail, then you're not making an informed decision. And that's then essentially your risk management processes wrapped up in one. So everything that I'm hearing here from a supply chain risk management perspective, it's almost music to my ears in terms of this is what the organizations and industry should be moving to. This level of detail, this level of transparency, knowing where you are real time, monitoring it, having the analytics to then ultimately make a decision.
No, thank you, Simon. I'll go back to you, Loic, on what might seem like a very simple question. Is IoT then like RFID, or is there a distinction between both?
RFID has been around for 10, 15, 20 years. And so I think we're all familiar with the concept. And it was a great way to start to track and have more information about, to serialize certain assets and know where they are across the supply chain. but it comes with a bit of baggage in terms of you need to ask people to scan goods in and out, or bring the goods through certain gates, which are a bit tedious to deploy. And when you've got nationwide scale, that's actually causing too much friction. And we see actually a lot of customers that just started with RFID and want to actually reduce the level of friction. They don't want to ask their customers to scan the goods they send them anymore. They want to go scan free or scan less, that's the term. And so that's what IoT can enable. You can now know where your goods are and where your assets are without you asking your customers or your contractors to scan anything. And so that's the beauty of IoT. So it's an evolution to RFID, but a lot of, for instance, devices that have 0G IoT capability, for instance, also have RFID, just in case someone wants to do a local scan. So the two are complementary, but 0G IoT is the next the next level. On top of this, if you've got assets that suddenly experience a shock or a temperature threshold that's that's met or exceeded, then with IoT you can send a message and alert straight away, whereas with RFID you don't have that visibility. So I'd say these are the two key differences.
Excellent. No, thank you. That was a great explanation, Loic. I'll go back to you, David, with your experiences. Can you share examples where possible of IoT at work in practice?
Absolutely. Thanks, Brendan. So one example I'd like to share is a real life example. A client of ours within our global group, it related to sort of sea freight risk, sea freight visibility for a major tyre manufacturer. This client, Michelin, so a very large organisation, the second biggest tyre manufacturer in the world. You can imagine many distribution points all over. They service every global market and many customers within each of those markets. This context was pre-pandemic, so this solution arrived before that, but I can see it will have paid dividends for them through this quite disruptive period. I mean, the pandemic itself has obviously had a big impact on shipping availability. And we went in this country between turning off demand and then ramping demand back on overnight and finding that there's limited shipping capacity and limiting shipping assets now floating around the global network. So a huge issue with knowing when your product's going to move, where it is, and really this predates that, but it plays nicely into how you would actually use an IoT solution, in this case around container tracking, to understand where your inventory is and how best to use that inventory to service sort of a multinational requirement. We just go one slide. So this container tracking use case was for Michelin. Their business problem was really a lack of reliable data coming from their shippers to know where their products were, whether they were on schedule. And in that environment, with that lack of visibility, their way of managing that risk at that point in time was to add inventory to the system. So they were sitting on significant inventory all around the world to buffer this lack of understanding of real lead times for shipping and also the conditions of the product through the journey. They also had tried a number of things to try and close that gap and provide information that weren't technical. They were more relationship driven. So I think for many who work in the supply chain space, we understand the concept of a third party provider. So logistics organisation is providing a service, but then a fourth party provider that sort of can sit on top and manage a number of 3PLs on your behalf. So they went down the track of relying on a 4PL to provide that control tower information based on their relationships and information with all the other carriers. And I think even today, 4PLs really struggle to do that in real time. And that was the experience of Michelin a number of years ago. So they thought that with the advent of IoT technology and in partnership with Sigfox and ourselves, decided on a trial to essentially set up an IoT solution tracking containers globally. So in simple terms, it's being able to put a sensor in their containers and then having those sensors communicate information along the journey of that container, mapping against the expected journeys of the containers, and then being able to visualize that in real time. So that was essentially the product, the proof of concept. It's now being sort of productionized and is being used globally, and it's been developed into an actual market product. So it's now beyond Michelin. And I think that in itself talks to the success and value that a product like this can provide. In terms of the benefits that it provided to Michelin, I mean, the visibility is the first step, as Simon was saying. So the more you know about your supply chain and the more you know of your supply chain in real time, the better decisions you're going to make, and the less buffering you put into your supply chain as a result. So you're minimizing the risk, and then you actually responding by saying, well, now that I know more and I can track this and respond in real time, I need less inventory in the system. So there's quite a big commercial benefit to Michelin in reducing the inventory levels globally as a result of this solution. So, conceptually a very simple solution, but it's filled a massive void in their information and their ability to manage the risk of not having stock, and then commercializing that through essentially reducing their stock levels. At the same time, they've had visibility of the shipper's performance, which is really important because that's the commercial relationship. There's a service provided and an expectation that service is delivered on time. When you can see everything that's going on, you can obviously then use that in a commercial sense to maintain essentially the requirements of the commercial arrangements with those shippers. So Michelin saw a number of value points in this particular solution. This here is just a visualization of the solution at the time. You can see the containers moving. It's a combination of IoT and also sort of publicly available satellite information around the actual ships. So the containers are associated with the ships. The sensors themselves are able to essentially alert. You can build sort of stage gates. So when a container is leaving a port, when it's arriving at port, whether it's sitting at a port for a period of time beyond what you expect in terms of detention, it can give you information around, not for Michelin, but for other products, temperature control as an example, and all nicely presented back in a dashboard that a user can engage with, and then essentially respond as things pop up. So one example, one close to our organisation that we're sort of very proud of, and I think a good example of IoT use.
Excellent. Thank you, David. That certainly puts it into real life perspective. Simon, I'll wheel back to you here. Obviously, with what's being discussed here, what's your view of the impact of these insights for your whole risk management strategy and control?
So I think picking up from what David was saying around containers on the ocean, comes back to that transparency of the supply chain, and that being a core business continuity outcome. Knowing what can go wrong, having the plans in place to respond, testing that plan, making sure that they work and that they're fit for purpose and viable. The biggest risk of having a complex supply chain is not knowing what it means, how it's made up, but more importantly, how and where it can fail. Today, more than ever, with the examples that my panelists have shared, being able to demonstrate what can go wrong, and it's only a matter of time and how your organisation could be affected. Part of risk management is also preparation. Preparation here is key, and the response to that is vital. If I was to think about how you then potentially go about implementing or thinking about the need in this space, I'd start with the end in mind. What success as an organisation or as a function are you after? And what does that final state look like? What problems are you trying to solve? And as I said, what does that success look like? To have oversight of a complex supply chain through a risk management lens, I'd be asking myself these questions. I'm sure there'd be another 100 more that could be asked as well. How well do you know what it's made up of? What does your supply chain contain? How many links? By mapping your value chain, you'll get that level of either comfort or oversight. Once you have that, what vulnerabilities exist? What information do I need? When I have that information, how am I going to use it, implement it, and ensure that my entire organization is across it? But we've got things like emerging risks taking place in global at the moment. Climate change is a big one. Knowing that on the back of climate change, we're going to be getting a lot more uncertainty in weather and events. We're talking about sea here and having stock on the sea. If one of the great benefits and outcomes of this is that you've actually got less stock in transit because you've got greater clarity and transparency of where it is, then you're reducing your organization's exposure or quantum to risk. And then the biggest one that I can really think of today in terms of risk management, it's that competitive landscape. How are you as an organization innovating, embracing these technologies to be a step ahead? Because if you're not, your competitors are, and they're having these conversations and they're thinking about it. So there's, I think it's been able to demonstrate with this, I see this as I've said, a great risk management solution and outcome, but it is incredibly complex, everything that's made up and the different ways that you can approach your need around this. And I think that there was one key takeaway, looking at these types of solutions, it's then just around selling that message, putting that business case together so that the decision makers in your organizations can see the benefit and the overall bottom line to not only you, but your customers and your end user.
Fantastic. Excellent comments, Simon. David, I'll take a question back to you. Obviously, you've talked about some client activities, engagements through your business enterprise. In your experiences, though, what are the key factors for successful IoT project implementation? And then on that basis, how do you measure and deliver to the ROI of the project?
Thanks, Brendan. I think scroll one slide forward. Thanks, Heidi. So for me, key success factors for IoT project implementations or delivery is similar to any sort of change delivery at the end of the day. From a digital perspective, which I guess, depending on where you are in your digital journey and transformation, the first thing is really what we would promote, awareness of the urgency to start a digital journey. I think that's the starting position. Having a solid understanding of the different types of digital technologies available. I think Loic touched on a few different technologies that do play in this IoT or in aligned areas of IoT. And you'll often find in market that they'll be working in combination. So having a real understanding of the application of the different types of technologies and how they may work for your business is really key as part of that knowledge building and application through a change initiative. And I think both Simon and Loic might have mentioned this before, identifying the concrete use cases of IoT technology for your business. So where is it going to drive value, or where is it going to help you mitigate core supply chain risk? That's where you need to be very clear up front. Because whatever you do in this space, you want to see that investment return some benefit to the business, so that then you can build on that platform. My experience, if you get the first project wrong in the digital space and in an IoT project, then it gets very difficult to sell that more broadly across the business. So you want to find the most fruitful area, the biggest problem, and you want to iterate on that until you've found success. So once you do find that area, proving this concept, iterating the solution, which is essentially what we did with Michelin. Michelin, when we first worked with them on this particular solution, were very concerned that the devices weren't going to be able to send the signals, and that we'd put the devices in and you get nothing back. So it took the physical piloting and I guess testing and proving that the solution can actually work to build the confidence in the organisation that this was a good investment and something that should be continued through to sort of production and now beyond that in terms of turning into a market software. And the final point, I think, which for me is always a key success factor, is around understanding what it means to the people of your supply chain. So, you know, you can make change, but unless the people have been part of the journey, unless you understand the process impact and the impact on their roles, a change like this will never stick, and you'll never get the benefit unless the sort of the people change aspect is embedded in the actual project transformation. I've got one more slide in terms of practically how do we see these solutions be developed, identified, developed and delivered. And there's sort of two schools of thought, and it really is dependent on the nature of your business. One is you sort of choose one of the very well-known and market-ready use cases. So it could be container tracking, an example, or it could be, there was a slide there that Loic may touch on later around asset management, particularly in the pool asset management space. They're all in market now, and they're being used to great effect. If your business can see value in those use cases, then you jump straight into that as the solution that you want to try. The second is to sort of take one step back and look broadly at your value chain. As Simon said, understand how it works, understand where the key risk points are, and try and find IoT application in those areas to give you information and help you manage that risk. That's a bit of a longer process, but I think if you haven't done any digital innovation to this point in your organisation, taking the broader view and really getting better understanding of your supply chain and the risks and values along that chain is probably the best place to start, and will set your program up for success.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Loic, as this slide suggests, there's been a recent MHD feature article with your partners, Loscam and Active, talked quite a bit about how the solution created better, more trusted relationships. Can you expand on this and the importance of it as well?
Yeah, absolutely, Brendan. Loscam is so well-known brands and company, like an asset pooler that typically rents pallets, but also non-pallet items to their customers in Australia and Asia Pacific. And so you see that big IBC or GPAC used over there actually is now fully tracked by the Loscam track and trace solution that they deployed. You see like the device on one of the picture here. And Loscam has been working with us for 3 years to bring that solution and do the exploration actually that David mentioned. But it all became very real last year when Active, so the logistics service provider to Mitsubishi Motors in Australia, actually helped them track and trace their IBCs across their basically all their dealers that were moving parts, and they managed to reduce by 20% loss of IBCs, and they de-hired 30% of the number of IBCs. And back to David's point, if you understand where your assets are, you understand your risk, and therefore you reduce your risk buffer. And so that's what they did. And so Mitsubishi was delighted. All their dealers, actually there were some very simple fact-based conversations between Active and the various dealerships around. I know that there are 2 IBCs that are not used, they haven't moved for 3 days. I'm coming to pick them up tomorrow. end of conversation. It's not like back and forth and just tedious conversations, and it just makes a frictionless, trust-based partnership approach to the supply chain challenges that needs to be overcome for Mitsubishi, and that was really, really powerful. There were a couple of other examples earlier on around other applications. So I think the slides above, DHL in Germany is tracking 250,000 whole cages across their postal network, so Deutsche Post to be precise, to know where these whole cages are when they are outside of their own distribution centers, because they tend to deliver parcels and leave the whole cage at the customer for a while, but they need the customers to send this back fast. And it was always tedious during the Christmas period just to get this fast enough. And now with the additional information, there are some fact-based conversations and actually commercial incentives to bring back the cages faster. And you see the asset utilization going up, and the customer satisfaction going up as well. So that's how IoT can be put at work in the supply chain.
Fantastic, very insightful, Loic. I guess to get a comment from yourself, Simon, obviously you see risk from different parties' perspectives. Can you give us a view on both sides of that equation, perhaps?
No, definitely. So I think that I really like this slide actually, because it asks the so what question. And it's a classic question that I've been asked 100 times in my career, and I've probably asked it maybe 50 times of my staff. What I think this demonstrates, and there's a couple of different ways to look at it, is that by doing something like this, by having this transparency and understanding, there is a tangible return on investment. And I think that that's fairly obvious with a lot of this, just as we were talking about just the simplicity of the conversations, not having to go back and forth, but actually a fact-based, frictionless conversation. That's one. What risk management can help you also do is look at it from the other perspective. So if this is going to mitigate losses, then it's not only going to give you a return to the bottom line, but it can also provide some savings as well against some of those losses that can occur. So I think that it's important when you're presenting the facts to your organization that you look at it in both ways, not only the upside benefit by doing this will save X amount of $100,000, it will also, at its best case, save us X amount of $100 in rework, time, efficiency, understanding, transparency, being able to then work with your other areas of the organization. From if you've got an operational excellence program or something like that going on, you can then start to build in those other areas of efficiency. Efficiency can bring about savings or a reduction of any loss or cost to your organization. So you can attack this from both ways. I think that with this slide, with that so what slide, looking at it through profit, procurement, customer, inventory, planning, logistics, manufacturing, retail, apply that so what, and then from a cost saving or a return, I think you're in a fairly strong place.
Thank you, Simon. David, a final question, and then we'll go into a bit of group feedback after this one. Looking at this from a strategic perspective, what are the benefits of IoT solutions, and what can we do with IoT data, be it now and moving forward, that we couldn't have done before? And I guess out of that, then, how can we apply this more intelligently?
Thanks, Brendan. I think if we roll one slide forward, Simon, a bit of a segue there in terms of what the strategic value of IoT can deliver for supply chain. I think it's essentially everything that you've said about it can work the top line, it can work the bottom line, it can be used to offset existing losses on the balance sheet and also the P&L when they're realised. So there's a genuine commercial value to the use of IoT solutions. And I think if we reflect back on Michelin and put that into the perspective of the question, what's the strategic value? Well, the strategic value for Michelin there was we want to deliver a better service outcome to our customers. And we know within the supply chain that we operate today, there's some gaps and some risks and some genuine issues that are causing us to, one, have to pay for the service level we want to deliver to our customers as a premium, or we're just unable to deliver what we want to the customer. And again, I think as Simon said, this is a competitive landscape for everyone. And you want to be a step ahead. So you've got to find these points of difference. So the strategic value of IoT is to essentially provide you with that useful management information in a more timely fashion than what you have traditionally been able to see, and use that to make good management decisions that drive commercial value for your customers, and then secondary outcome for yourself. But if you have your customer in mind all the way through the decision-making process, then you'll get the right result for your business. So I think that's really the top line strategic view of where the value of IoT can land from a supply chain sense. I think practically and operationally, IoT solutions do genuinely drive operational effectiveness, and they control costs. So those 5 use cases we spoke about up front, container tracking, value stream mapping, asset control, predictive maintenance, all of them have their own business cases. So it's either about inventory management, reduction, asset pool size and maintenance and obsolescence or loss management, let alone the customer service aspects of those 2 elements. The predictive maintenance, we spoke a little bit about that before, around you have the limited resource in terms of labour to apply from a maintenance sense. And I think everyone has seen that things have got a lot tighter, it needs to be more efficient. A lot of that stuff has been outsourced. And the ability to actually optimize that or find some value is really challenging unless you use solutions like IoT, which turn you from reactive to proactive. And that's where you'll find commercial value. So I think that's really my view, I think, on the strategic value and then the practical operational realization of value from IoT solutions across a number of different use cases.
Excellent. No, thanks, David. I'll go into sort of conclusion mode and then we'll go into some Q&A from here with some time allowing. Loic, in terms of, the landscape you're in the thick of all of this. Where do you see this going? Where can you see this application developing and expanding, into our lives, into other parts of our lives potentially?
And you mean beyond the supply chains?
Yeah, maybe, yeah. From just a consumer perspective even, and how it makes a difference to us as consumers.
So mass IoT is about, yes, connecting. So you connect supply chains, but you help utilities connect their meters, connect their sewage systems. You help agriculture. The agriculture sector to become more efficient. You connect flow meters, you get soil data, soil moisture data, you get insurers to, again, reduce risk because they understand better what's going on in the homes of their their customers. So all this is converging. So you can get assets to work smart, to work harder. And so if you make them work smarter, then that will benefit And ultimately, so I'm a big believer on the fact that the Internet of Things revolution has started and is going to continue for the next 15 years. And it's a key contributor to a more efficient and more carbon neutral Australia.
Yeah. Excellent. And Simon, same sort of question to you, given this is becoming more prevalent, how do you see this when you're looking at it through your lens of risk management, corporate or individual risk management, with rolling forward?
I think if we look at it from a personal point of view, things move so quickly today, and there's a demand to have things quickly. So if I order something on Amazon in my shop or something, there is an expectation that it is with me within 24, 48 hours. Stock, inventory, it's all critical in that overall aspect. And that's where I then think where this and these conversations that we've had feed into that. So this is an enabler for the individual of today in a very indirect, but what's becoming an ever more demanding aspect.
Indeed, absolutely. We've now got, in terms of timing, we have probably about 7-8 minutes for some questions. Just one question that's that I guess all of you could probably answer in your own way. How do you build a business case for the investment, if you like, for IoT into a business? And then, what's the potential of what sort of ROI would businesses be typically looking at for return on that type of investment? Happy if Loic, you want to kick off?
Yeah, yes. There were 5 key use cases that David had on. So it will depend on what are the key drivers. But for example, the tracking IBCs or tracking beer kegs. We track a lot of beer kegs in Australia. Like we've got one customer that has revolutionized the way the beer keg rental market works. And for them, the business case was customer growth. They have grown from acquired 300 customers because in 1 year, because they remove friction, right? They remove friction. They don't ask their customers to scan beer kegs anymore to know when they deliver. It happens automatically, and so that's one way of measuring a business case, like how much extra revenue and margin you get by securing more customers. You've got other customers that look at it and say, back to asset control, that's as David labeled it. If you've got a given pool of assets to service your existing requirements, you look at how many of these assets do you lose every year. 7, 8, 15% per annum get lost. So you can reduce that if you track them, typically. And on top of this, you can reduce that pool of assets if you make them work smarter. Because if you know where you have lazy, assets not working as hard as they should, then typically you can increase the asset utilization by 5, 10, 15, 20%. And, we've got customers like Qantas, who has $1 million plus returns on investments because they managed to increase asset utilization of the assets they use to service the airplanes. So that's the type of asset utilization, reduction of loss, and then new customers. And the fourth pillar, the fourth lever for your business case will be the reduction of the cost of handling equipment across a given supply chain. And so if you don't need to look for where your assets are, don't need to make phone calls, you reduce the number of litigation with your customers because they misplaced assets that like your returnable packaging equipment. All this contributes to the business case significantly.
Excellent, Loic. We're probably closing in with a few minutes to go, but David, same question. What's the typical situation you find with the clientele you're working with?
So probably take a slightly different spin. So IoT, I think still at this stage for a lot of companies is in the innovation bucket. So getting business cases set up for new things that don't have proven business cases within that organisation before, it needs to take a specific approach, and it tends to lend itself to an agile approach to essentially ask for some seed funding. But as we said before, have a really clear point of view on where the value is going to come from. So take a high value use case that you will improve, and then trial that with a small level investment that's a no risk investment, prove that out, and then use the finding to develop a business case that can be used to grow that. And I think that's sort of a pragmatic and sensible approach when you're trying to innovate.
Absolutely. Final question. There's actually a question from somebody in the audience here, Martin Lewis. Martin, your question is, what is the typical cost of the sensors transmitters? Just in simple terms. If maybe Loic or David might be able to respond.
Do you want me to take it, David?
I think you take it, Loic.
Okay. Well, the answer is it depends. It depends on the type of tracker, how big of a battery you want. But to give you an idea, the traditional, so it will vary from there are trackers in the millions of units for pallet tracking, and if we're getting there, there's a target of $10 per tracker. That's where it's going to go. Right now, if you buy trackers off the shelf, it'd be like $100, $150. And in volume, you're somewhere between the $20, $30, $40, $50 mark, depending on the type of tracker, how much sensors and analytics you need to be done in the tracker. And the art is about finding the right tracker for your application, for the type of asset you want, that give you the data you want for the maximum battery life possible. Because $100 over 10 years works for a lot of business case, and you don't want to send someone to remove a tracker, or change the batteries at year 5, because that will cost more than the cost of the tracker, and is a logistics nightmare. So it's a bit of art, but it's not the $1 RFID price point. It's more that $10 to $100 mark.
Fantastic. No, thank you, Loic. Now we're pretty much coming to time, so I'll close. Thank you again, all of you, for your valuable insights and depth of expertise to be able to contribute to this discussion. Simon, really appreciate it from a risk perspective, David from an expert consulting perspective, and Loic from a technology and applications field. Also to thank you to Heidi for sitting in the background controlling this, and there's somebody else who's done a huge amount of work in this preparation who will remain nameless at the moment, but huge thank you. You know who I'm referring to. If any of you would like to, anybody who's following this today as participants on the webinar, if you would like to follow Simon, David or Loic on LinkedIn, they're open to accepting requests, and we will also take this conversation into the ASCI LinkedIn group. So thank you all. It's been a real pleasure for all of your contributions, and I wish you all a great day, and hopefully this has been a benefit to yourselves in greater learning about IoT and risk management. Thank you so much.